Alright, so this is basically going to be my Saiyans in the Marvel Universe prologue story. Basically, it's just going to be the backstory of events for the remaster of one of my oldest stories that take place with Goku in the Marvel Universe. Some of you are familiar with it. It came out 3 years ago. I'm remastering that, and the first time I did it, I just included the prologue into the first episode, but this time I'm just going to give the prologue its own story before I get into Goku being on Earth. So anyway, with all that being said, let's get to it. The planet Vegeta was a harsh, unforgiving world, a crimson stained sphere of jagged mountains, scorched deserts, and sprawling battle arenas where the strong thrived and the weak perished. Here, the Saiyans ruled, a race of unparalleled warriors whose very existence was defined by conquest. Unlike the Kree or the Skrulls, who built vast empires through technological advancements, political maneuvering, and espionage, the Saiyans had no need for such intricacies. Their strength was their currency, and their brutality was their reputation. From birth, they were bred for war, their genetic code honed over generations to produce fighters capable of shattering armies with their bare hands. Their legendary Great Ape transformations made them forces of nature, capable of leveling entire countries under the light of a full moon. The Saiyans were not conquerors in the traditional sense, though. They did not build empires, nor did they rule the worlds they ravaged. Instead, they were the ultimate weapons, living engines of destruction, leased out to the highest bidder. Their reputation was not one of nobility or honor, even though they had royals, but of sheer unrelenting carnage, and when a Saiyan battle group descended upon a planet, it often led to a genocide. But the Saiyans lacked the technological prowess to traverse the stars en masse, unlike other civilizations, like the Shi'ar or the Kree. They had already mastered interstellar travel, so the Saiyans relied on archaic scavenged ships barely space-worthy, often traded to them by the very warlords who sought their services. Their homeworld was their stronghold for the most part, their people bound to it not by loyalty but by necessity. This limitation made them valuable to the darker forces of the universe. Warlords, tyrants, and cosmic despots paid handsomely for Saiyan warriors. A single Saiyan could turn the tide of a planetary invasion. A squad of them could break entire civilizations. They were the ultimate shock troops, loyal only to the highest bidder. Their services traded like weapons. Some employers used them to subjugate worlds, others to exterminate populations deemed unworthy. And the Saiyans didn't really care for the reasons. They cared only for the battle and the rewards it came with. The Saiyan services were brought by the most ruthless beings in the cosmos. Among their most infamous employers, Thanos. Before the Mad Titan sought the Infinity Stones, he hired Saiyan berserkers often to soften up resistant worlds. The Brotherhood of the Badoon paid in stolen technology to have Saiyans soften up planets for their enslaving operations, and other employers hired these powerhouses as well. But none of these employers cared about the Saiyans beyond their usefulness, and the Saiyans in turn cared only for the thrill of combat. And so, while their name spread fear across the galaxy, the reach was relatively limited. Only the strongest, most elite Saiyans ever left Vegeta to do these high-end operations. They were sent on missions that promised worthy battles. The rest trained endlessly or were used as cannon fodder for spatial wars, waiting for the day that they would be unleashed upon the stars. Asgard knew of them. Stories of Saiyan warriors even reached Odin's throne, though he deemed them warriors that lacked honor, or as he called them, warriors without honor. But his son Thor longed for the day that he would get to face off against a Saiyan in battle. But there was a Saiyan that was distinct from his kind in some ways. While most Saiyans were content serving as hired muscle for planetary purges, Bardock was different. He was a low-born warrior with no taste for blind conquest. He sought adventure and treasures as a ravager instead. The ravagers were not a single unified force, but a loose network of pirate factions, each operating under their own code. Some were thieves, others smugglers, a few even fancied themselves gentlemen outlaws. But all shared one rule: no slavery. For Bardock, it was the closest thing to a home he had ever known. Bardock first encountered the Ravagers after a botched mercenary job left him stranded on a half-world. on Half-World, a lawless trading post. Captain Stakar, also known as Starhawk, himself offered Bardock a place among his faction after the Saiyans single-handedly fought off a Badoon raiding party. Though wary at first because of the Saiyans' savage reputation, the Ravagers soon learned that Bardock's loyalty was unshakable. If the pay was good, but unlike most Saiyans, Bardock didn't kill unless it was absolutely necessary because he preferred his bounties alive because they usually paid better. His reputation grew when he was called the Red Ape, a Ravager who would take out warships with his bare hands, but he still split the loot fairly, all while wearing his signature red bandana. He often clashed with Yondu Yodonta factions more than once, but even the infamous Centurion knew better than to double-cross him. Bardock's Ravager career was anything but boring. In one job, Bardock was hired to extract a criminal from Xander's prison. Mid-job, he stumbled upon a Kree assassination plot against the Nova Prime. He didn't really care about the politics, but the Kree assassins shot in his direction first and injured his shoulder. And by the time the smoke cleared, the would-be assassins were space dust, and Bardock walked away with double the pay and a grudging thank you from the Nova Corps. And even after Bardock's demise, which comes later on, his legend lived on. Yondu would later tell Peter Quill stories of the Saiyan Ravager, who once stole from Ego, the living planet. The Collector actually still has one of Bardock's old scouters in his archives. And somewhere else in the cosmos, a mysterious Saiyan survivor wearing a familiar Ravager insignia still roams the stars to this very day after the eventual end of the planet Vegeta. But that will be a story that will come later on. Bardock wasn't the only Saiyan sick of the Warlord's politics, and eventually he branched out and created his own Ravager faction. Among the lower-class warriors, there were whispers of free crews that had circulated for years. Stories of Saiyans who fled to the stars, answering to no king or employer. Most were hunted down by the Saiyan elites, who would be told of these deserters by their employers. But Bardock's crew that he ended up making had survived and were recruited by him over some years to form the only Saiyan Ravager group. And the founding members were Bardock, the tactician, brawler, the only one who could keep the others in line. Tora, a hulking brute with a love for explosives. He even managed to modify his Great Ape form to carry on to hold ship-mounted cannons that would use his ki to blast long range. Fasha was the crew's sharpshooter. She stole a Kree accuser's plasma gauntlet and never gave it back. And it was able to harness her ki to make extremely crazy long-range shots. Then there was Borgos, a smuggler who specialized in acquisitions, aka theft. Shugesh was the wild card who had a habit of eating mid-battle. And the thing about Bardock's crew that was unique was that they were weak, low-class Saiyans who didn't shy away from using technology to enhance their abilities. And their leader, Bardock, was the only naturally strong member of their group, and together they were known as the Bloodtales, the only all-Saiyan Ravager faction in history. But the Bloodtales didn't start at the top. Their first ship was a stolen Badoon slaver vessel, held together by welds and sheer spite. The Bloodtales had 3 rules. Of course, no slavery, which was every Ravager's one moral line. Rule number 2 was no traitors. And the third and most important rule was always get paid. They once chased a client across 3 star systems for withholding their credits. And Bardock was also unique amongst his crew, like his crew members, but in a way outside of technology. Bardock was unique because he had a rare mutant gene that allowed him to have vague visions of the future. And some of his allies viewed it as intuition, and Bardock often viewed it as somewhat of a curse. He had these little psychic echoes. Bardock's visions came in fragments, flashes of screams, fires, and futures that might never be, and at first he dismissed them as battle fatigue. Then they started to come true. Bardock never told his crew about the visions entirely, but they began to notice, and on one day Bardock had a vision of his home world, and the vision of planet Vegeta's doom grew constant. Every night, every nap, every blink, he would wake up in cold sweats, and Bardock knew his time was short, as well as the time for his race. The planet Vegeta hung in space like a blood-red jewel, its surface scarred by endless infighting and failed regime changes. Bardock felt the most foreign on his own home planet, yet now, drawn by the visions he couldn't escape, and a father's duty he couldn't deny, so he was returning. and his crew followed him back without question. As Bardock walked down the streets of Planet Vegeta, his visions came stronger now, like a gear shifting on a doomsday clock. Kakarot, his youngest son, barely a day old according to the birth alert, was waiting somewhere in the planet's sterile incubation chambers. Undoubtedly, without his intervention, the boy would be another number to the Saiyan's death machine, another weapon to be forged and used and discarded. The docking bay stank of oil and arrogance. Elite warriors sneered at Bardock's crew disembarked, their modified ravager armor drawing contemptuous stares. Luke crawled back from the gutter, and Elite spat. Bardock simply ignored them. He had spent years humbling highborn Saiyans, till he had finally begun to ignore their jabs whenever he was on world. The capital sprawled before them, a monument to Saiyan's might, built on the bones of weaker species. Towering spires housed the warrior elite, while the lower classes crowded in the shadows. Somewhere in the sterile halls of the birthing complex, a Medroid was already stamping his son's fate. Designation, low class, disposition, off-world colonization. Bardock's blood boiled. They were likely going to send Kakarot to die on some backwater rock, just as they tried to do with Radix, a son he never saw again. Just as they did with all defective infants that were of low-class birth and weak power levels. The nursery was colder than space. Rows of incubation pods hummed under fluorescent lights, each containing a future soldier of the Saiyan Empire. Bardock found Kakarot in Sector 9, a squirming, dark-haired infant with a shockingly low power level of 2. And Bardock thought it might be a computer error, but he didn't have time to worry about that, and he began evacuating his son. As he sealed Kakarot into a pod from his own ship, something made him pause. From his belt, he removed the bloodtale insignia, the only thing he had to be remembered by. It looked absurdly large in the infant's tiny hands. Make something out of yourself and leave the rest of these Saiyans in the dust, he growled, sealing the hatch, and then he sent the pod off to the planet Earth. His crew told him that they still had time to leave for another mission, but before he could say anything, some elite Saiyans blasted his ship, halting their exit and telling him that King Vegeta wanted to see him at that moment, and Bardock knew that his vision was going to become a reality, because now he was stranded on this world that was soon to end. Right? And before I go, by the way, give me some suggestions in the comment section of how the Saiyan world got destroyed. The obvious one I could use is Galactus, but I could use something outside the box, so comment down below some ideas. And if I use your idea, I'll shout you out in the video when Planet Vegeta's fate is revealed in later episodes. And don't just put a villain's name. Tell me why you think they should be the destroyer of the Planet Vegeta. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Peace.